Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Today I just wanted to bring you some ideas on how to use narration in your homeschool. Narration is something that we use an awful lot here in our house, and I've talked about it now and then here on my channel, but I've realized that I never actually made a video strictly dedicated to narration, so that's what I'm going to do today. Now, in case you're not really sure what narration is, there are two forms of narration, oral and written. Oral narration is really good for kids of all ages. And what it basically is your children telling back to you what they remember, whether it would be from listening to you read a read aloud to them, whether it would be a book that they were reading to themselves. It could be even a narration of a video that they had watched or a documentary. And sometimes, depending on how involved it was, even a lesson that you've done. Oral narration is a great exercise in children for memory. It's great practice in them learning to express themselves, and it really is a nice step into teaching kids how to write down their thoughts that they have going on in their head. A lot of times kids have an issue getting their thoughts onto paper, and the more that your children narrate orally, telling you back the things that they remember, the more used to it they are going to be. A lot of times what I tell my kids is to write down what you would say to me. Pretend that you're talking to me. That's what I want you to write down in your narration. And that has really seemed to help my kids a lot. Now, written narration, Charlotte Mason actually recommends that you don't start written narration with children until they are 5th grade. However, if you are wanting to do written narration with your younger children, by all means, it's completely up to you. Now, younger children who might not have the writing skills necessary for really detailed written narration, they could always use an illustration. It would be a detailed illustration, maybe from something that they remembered, from something that you read to them. But again, it's all from the same things. Maybe a book that you read to them, a book they read to themselves. It could be from a video. Everything that I mentioned before still applies to written narration. But rather than your child just telling back to you what they remember, this is your child writing down for you what they remember and writing down for themselves what they remember. And so that's why I say, if you're going to have a younger child do it and use illustrations, you really want to emphasize to your kids, to use as much detail as they can think of, because you want them to show you what they're remembering from whatever it was that they listened to or that they read. Now, I'm just going to give you some ideas on using oral and written narration in your homeschool. A lot of these things are ways that we have or are still implementing them in our homeschool. So, for example, oral narration is something that we use very, very often. I don't do it every single day with my kids. I kind of like to keep them on their toes. I don't tell them the day that we're going to be doing narration, because I want them to be paying attention all the time, because we use it mainly for our read aloud. Now, a lot of times when my kids will be reading in their silent reading book, they will come up to me and they will tell me everything that they read about in that chapter. That is also narration. The more formal narration that I use, though, is during our read aloud. Now, oral narration during a read aloud can be done several different ways. You can choose to stop after every several paragraphs to ask your child to tell back what they remember. You could stop after every few pages to have your child tell back what they remember, or you could stop just at the end of a chapter and have your child tell back what they remember. Now, I will say that stopping every few paragraphs is going to tend to draw out the process of narrating. And yeah, it will make it longer for you to read whatever passage you're reading that day. If you're reading a full chapter and you're stopping every few paragraphs, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more time. But this is especially good for kids who are just starting narrating, because it gives them shorter bits of information for them to remember, and it's not so overwhelming. And as time goes on, you can make that stretch out longer and longer and longer. Now, if you have several kids who are listening to your read aloud, like I do, I actually use two different methods for this. If we have a chapter that is long enough, what I have been doing is I will usually read about 2 pages, and then I will stop, and I will have one child tell me back everything that they remember from those 2 pages. And then I will read 2 more pages, and then I will stop, and I will have another child read me back, not read me back, but tell me back everything from what they remember. And I will just continue on with that until the chapter is done, until each child has narrated at least once. Now, whether or not you let your other kids add into the other kids' narrations is completely up to you. Once in a while, I will let my kids add in things that my other children might have forgotten. But it really depends on time for you, and it really depends on if your other children get a little flustered when people are adding on to their narrations. So that's just one of those things that you can tailor to your own family. Now, for those chapters that I'm reading that are shorter, I usually have about 6 kids listening to one narration, which means that our chapters have to be at least 12 pages long if I'm going to do it the way that I just described. If we have a shorter chapter, what I have been doing is I will read the entire chapter, and then when we get to the end of the chapter, I will go around the room and I will have each child tell me one thing that they remember. And sometimes that's hard, I'm going to admit, because a lot of my kids get overexcited and they want to tell you more than one thing, and they're so used to telling you back like everything that they remember, that I have to tell them, okay, that's it, you already told me the one thing, because you don't want the kids taking all of the other kids' ideas. So it is a little bit more challenging for the shorter chapters, but it absolutely positively can be done. Now, if you want to use written narration in your homeschool, that is also something that we have done, and we used to do it a lot for our read-alouds. Each of my children had a 3-prong folder for whatever read-aloud we were going through. Whenever we would start a new read-aloud, I would usually print out maybe a coloring page having to do with it, or they could draw, something that had to do with the new book, and we would glue that on the front of our 3-pronged folder, and that would be the cover. And then each day I would have my kids choose a notebooking page, and they would do some sort of written narration of the book that we had read that day. And one really, really helpful tip that I learned during this process, and that we ended up doing all the time, was having a word and phrase bank on the whiteboard. So what I would basically do is, and I have to say that this is something that is really good for kids who are just starting to do written narrations and who are still a little bit unsure of themselves. But sometimes even older kids appreciate having this word and phrase bank. So what this actually is after I used to get done reading the chapter that we were reading for the day, I would go up to the whiteboard and I would say to my kids, okay, are there any words or phrases that you want me to write down that you want to be able to know how to spell, or that you just don't want to forget when you're writing your narration? So a lot of times my kids would tell me like key words that they wanted to remember, or maybe that they didn't know how to spell. Sometimes it would be complete phrases, sometimes even complete sentences. Especially for my younger kids, a lot of times my younger kids, even though they weren't able to write in detail by themselves yet, they wanted to be like the big kids. So they wanted to have written narration with actual words and not just all illustrations. So what they used to do a lot they would make their illustration, and then they would ask me to write a sentence on the board for them. But I would not tell them what it was. They would have to tell me the sentence that they wanted to write, and it had to be something about the story. So then I would write that on the board for them as well. So then as my kids were doing their written narration, they would have the board to refer to, so that I wouldn't have to keep going from child to child, telling each child how to spell this word, or, just to help them in one way or another. It really helped to make the whole process more relaxing for us. So, narration is a phenomenal way for you to just teach your kids to just really learn to listen with intention, to have them pay attention, and to have them know that they are going to, in some form, be telling you back what they remember. And for my kids, that really does help them. Sometimes, if my kids, if they know 100% that we're not doing narration that day, sometimes my kids' minds do wander. So this is really, it's a nice process and discipline in having them learn to listen as they are, as I am reading, or paying attention while they are reading to themselves, paying attention to a documentary. And this helps with, even the oral narration helps with their writing skills. Oral narration is that first step into written narration. So it is just as important as the written narration parts. And written narrations very often are something fun for the kids to do, especially if it's a book that they're really, really enjoying. It's a great way to get your kids to write, especially when they don't really like to write so much. But anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram, because YouTube always disables my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave that link in the description box as well. And today I want to give a shout out to my Patreon patron, Vicky. Thank you so much for supporting me. You have been with me for quite some time now, and I always love interacting with you. And anytime that you have any ideas that you want me to talk about, you just let me know. And I hope all of you have a great day.